All right. Hi, folks. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. And welcome to this online meetup. I'm just going to wait just a few seconds to see if folks are still joining. And then we will go ahead and get started. All right. All right. Well, welcome again. Um, Welcome to this online meetup. My name is Max Katz, and I had everything education in the community for Okta workflows. Now, today's topic is a pretty cool one, and then I'm going to show you how to build an API connector in Okta workflows using the connector builder. Okay, and then more specifically, we will um, uh, we'll use the connector builder to build an API connector, and we'll publish the connector, and then we will actually use the connector in a flow. Okay. Um, Now, this event is being recorded, and the replay will be available on Crowdcast right in the same place where you're now once we end the session, and then also tomorrow on YouTube. You can follow our Crowdcast channel, and then when we go live, you'll be notified. Again, you'll be notified when we go live, and then also register for upcoming events. We don't have any upcoming events as of just this particular moment, but we'll have an event in June, 2 events in June. I just need to put them on the schedule. But we do have a monthly getting started workflows event, meetup. I'm sorry, online meetup, where we go over just getting started with Okta workflow. So that's going to be in the beginning of June. Okay. Let me just double check. Can you maybe put in chat that you can hear me and see me? Okay. Or just a thumb up. Okay, cool. Because I have another screen here, and for some reason it says the speaker is still getting ready, so I'm not sure why. Maybe I can just come back to this event. Oh, this is better. Okay, this is better. I think it just gets stuck somewhere. Okay. All right, so let's get started. Let me move the screen off. Awesome, thank you. All right, let me switch to workflows. Okay. I also want to say, so this is a more advanced topic, building a connector. And again, we have a lot of videos about just using workflows on our YouTube channel. But again, this is a more advanced topic. So, but to start, so I have a flow that I'm going to come back to this flow at the very end. And again, if you build anything with workflows, you've seen this view before. But I'm actually going to go to a connector builder. And then to open the connector builder, you go to the upper right corner and you see these 4 squares, right? And then you can open the Okta dashboard. And then I'm going to open the connector builder. So that's how you launch the connector builder, right? And this is the main page. Now let me actually go back for a second to this view that I think most of you are familiar with. And when I talk about connectors, this is what I'm really talking about, right? So again, if you've built anything in workflows before, it's very likely you've used a connector, right? And these are all the out-of-the-box connectors, right? So if you, for example, use Okta, right? So there's a connector to Okta, and then the connector has different actions, right? Now behind the scenes, these are API calls, but in the workflows we call them actions, right? And if we're going to Google Drive, for example, there's a connector to Google Drive, and then these are various actions that this connector supports, right? So that's what we're going to build. We're going to build a connector to an API, right? And then it will be once we're done, it will be, when we deploy it, it will be listed here with an icon. And then again, we'll click on it, and then there'll be an action that that we built, and then you can use. Okay. Now, so let me go back here. Now, the actual API we're going to be using is this Open Weather API or Open Weather service. And these are just the API keys that I'm going to be using, right? So, but of course, right, I mean, the whole idea is that you can build the connector to really any API. But in this particular example, I'm going to be using Open Weather. It's kind of a more straightforward. Also, the connector that I'm building, I published a tutorial. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, it says build the connector for Open Weather API. So if you click on that link, it will take you to a tutorial. But it's available on the Okta blog. So if you want to do this yourself, you can follow this tutorial. It's a very detailed step-by-step tutorial, and you build exactly the same connector. So you can, again, try this as well. All right. But let's get started actually building something. So these are the connectors that I built before, and I'm going to build a new connector, and then I'm going to click this button, and I'm going to call this, I already have weather 2, so let's call this weather 3, and weather connector, or any description that you want. Also, if you folks any questions, you can put them in the chat. There's a separate Q&A section. I'm also going to share my email again at the end if you have any questions after the session, so you can always also email me. All right, I'm going to click save. All right, and I created a new connector. Now, just when you build a connector in the connector builder, what's really cool is that you use flows and actions and well, not actions, use flows and functions to build the connector, right? So there's no separate toolkit or some kind of a development kit or anything. You actually use workflows to build the connector, right? And that's really neat. And again, you of course will see this in just a few, just as I start building it, okay? But now the connector, I created the connector project, right? Not necessarily sort of a connector, it's the connector project. And then it has a different tabs here. Overview, where there is a name, description, icon. The flows tab this is where we're going to build the flows for the connector. This is my connection information. And then also there's a deployment information. So once you build the connector, you can deploy it. And then that's, once you deploy it, that's when it becomes available in workflows. All right. But I'm going to go to overview. And so the first thing is that authentication. So usually the first thing you're going to do is that you're going to set up authentication for the API. And then I'm going to click set up authentication. And then you can choose which one. You can use basic, auth, 2, or a custom. Now I'm going to use a custom because this particular API that I'm using an API key. And the reason is it's more straightforward to kind of demonstrate and build. I have another tutorial that uses auth 0. So I'm just going to, quick go back. If you go to the Okta blog, and then there's the Spotify API. So there is a tutorial that shows you how to build a connector to Spotify API, which uses auth 2.0. All right. But again, I'm choosing the custom with an API key is just a little bit more straightforward, just for demonstration purposes. Okay. So I'm going to select custom, and then I'm going to add the API key. So I'm going to click add parameter, and I'm going to say here, this is the label, and the actual key is app ID. Now, why is this app ID? Is because I'm actually going to go to Open Weather, and let me just see if I can find it here. It's right here. So this is an example of an API call, and you can see that the API key is called app ID, right? So of course, that's why my key is also called app ID. Okay. So, and also notice, which is really also neat, is that there is a preview of how the card will look, right? So, okay, so that's all we need on this side, and I'm going to click save. And now, so I set up an authentication for this connector. So again, whatever the API is using, if it uses basic or Auth0, you would, of course, choose that. Okay. I'm going to come back to this, to the icon and the color. We're going to set it up at the end, but let's go to flows. So a connector could consist of flows, and there are two flows that every connector will have. Okay, and the first one is called an HTTP helper flow. What the flow does is that it actually does the actual API call. Okay, so it's a system flow, right? So the end user in workflows will never see the flow, right? So it's a system flow that the connector uses. And so to create a flow, we're going to create a new flow, and we're going to, the name has to be HTTP helper, right? So it's a name, that's the exact name that you need to use. And now I have a cheat sheet that I created, so I don't need to type. So I'm going to copy this text, and I'm going to, right? And as with other flows, again, in workflows, I'm going to save the data so you can see how data is passed from card to card for testing. And then I'm going to click save. Okay. Now, so far, I mean, this looks just a regular flow. And now for the event, I'm going to make this a helper flow, right? And now I'm going to define some inputs. But of course, one difference that you see is that there's connection information that is being available in this flow. Okay, so again, I call the flow HTTP helper. Again, you need to use this name. It's a system flow, and then it's a helper flow, but it's a slightly different helper flow because there's a connection information that the flow makes available. Okay, now I'm going to create the parameters or the inputs that I would need to make a call. So the first one is relative URL, right? The second one is a request method. So that's like get or a post. Then it's going to be a query. It's going to be headers, and it's going to be the body. Now, the last three, they need to be an object, right? So that's what I'm going to do, right? So again, it's a helper flow. It's going to make an API call, and these are the inputs that I can provide. So if you look at these inputs, these are the inputs that you would, usually provide to any API call. All right, and so that's why we have them here as well. All right, now I'm going to add a card called raw request, and it's a card that does an API call, right? But you specify everything: the URL, the method, everything. Okay, but again, it does look very similar to, well, actually, there is a raw request in workflows, so it's really almost the same card. So the URL, because we're passing the relative URL, right? We need to get the base URL and then combine it with the relative URL. So I'm going to add a step here, and I'm going to use concatenate. And I'm going to set the base URL, and I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet. This is the base URL. Copy it, set it here, and then I'm going to set the relative URL, right? Now, if you wanted, you could test this card. So just to give you, sorry, let me go over my cheat sheet. This is the relative URL. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to test the card, enter the URL, click test, and then I get the full URL, right? Also, this is not required, but You could rename this. So for example, you can call this, full URL. All right. All right. The next step, well, actually, now we can actually map, so we can connect. We can connect like this. All right. Now, another thing is that the query, I need to combine the query with the API key, because if you remember, or you don't have to remember, but if you, when I was sharing this, the API key is passed in the query. But I can also have other parameters. So you can see this API has other parameters like longitude and latitude. So I need to merge the API key with any other information that a particular endpoint requires. And so I'm going to use, sorry, I'm switching to the wrong tab. I'm going to use a merge card. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the query and I'm going to take the connection. Right. So whatever query, like the city or the latitude or whatever other information is going to be merged with the API key. And then if you wanted to, you could, just to make it so that more easier to understand or to follow, we can say merged query. Right? And I'm going to, right? Now for the headers, I'm going to take it from the input and finally the body. Right? And then I'm going to take, this is the output from the raw request card, and I'm going to connect it to the output for this flow. All right, and then I'm just going to change this to object, and I'm going to save. All right, now, so I built the flow again. I'm using workloads, or I'm using cards and functions to build the flow. But I can also test the flow like any other flow. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click run. Well, actually, let's take this a step back. Why don't we test this card first, right? And then we're going to enter the URL. I have a full URL here, right? It's going to be a get. I don't have any headers now for the query. Let's take this information. So checking the weather for Rome, and the units, I want to say the output in Celsius, and I'm going to put it here. All right, and so let's give this a try. All right, and right away I get back, and so this means the card works. And now we can do the same thing, testing the entire flow. So I'm going to click run. And what I do now is I want to create a connection, right? That I'm going to be reusing when I test other flows as well. And I'm going to create new connection. And notice that this is very similar to the authentication that I set up. So I'm going to call this weather3, just CB for connector builder, weather3 connection, and I'm going to set the API key. So I'm going to go back to my open weather, and I'm going to copy this API key, and I'm going to set it here. I'm going to click create. And so now I have a connection, so I don't need to provide the connection information. I still need to provide a relative URL. So going back to my cheat sheet, copy this. The request method is get. And now for the query, because I no longer need the API key, I'm just going to, for example, just do just this. All right. And I'm going to save the inputs. Let's run. All right. And this works. I get back information. So in Rome right now is 23 degrees Celsius. Okay. Well, very cool. So what we did is that we built a system flow called HTTP helper that performs a request based on two open weather API, and then we do specify the relative URL. One thing I'm forgetting, I can see here, is the method. If I don't connect it, it's going to be set to get. So I need to connect it like this. I forgot to do that. All right. All right. But that's again, we're going to use this helper flow in other flows to make the HTTP request call. All right. All right. There's one more system flow that we're going to create. I'm going to go back. And the next one is called Auth Ping, right? And then what this flow does, let me go, is that it does a connection health check. Let me enter it here in this. Let me create an event. Now for this one, it's a system flow. It's called Auth Ping. And then this is how the input looks, and that's all you need. Now, what this flow does is that, so whenever you go, let me go to workflows, and then when you open the flow for the, when you open the flow you built before, you will usually see the connectors there checking something. Let me see if I can maybe open something. Maybe open this one. No, I don't have any good examples here. No, still. Let me do this. Action, and then read user. So this is fine. I'm going to enter some information here. And I'm going to save. And then I'm going to go exit. And if I go back, well, this one didn't show it, but sometimes you'll see the connector is checking something. So that's what the Auth Ping does. It checks the connection for you, right? So when you open the flow for the first time, or when you add a card, right? Sometimes you'll see that it's spinning, so it's checking the connection is valid. Okay, so that's what the Auth Ping does, right? So let's build this flow. Let's see here. I've got my my notes here. Okay. So the way this is going to look is that we're going to add if error card. And then we're going to say something, hey, if the connection works, great. But if the connection doesn't work for some reason, then we're going to return an error message. Right? So if this is successful, then, well, if try this, we're going to call flow. Right? And then we're going to call our HTTP helper flow. Okay. And now we're going to set the URL. Now this particular flow, this is more of a hard-coded flow. Another sense is that you want to call some API endpoint that requires authentication, but it doesn't change. Some APIs have an endpoint such as me or /me, so you could use that. But if APIs don't have such an API, you can use really anything that requires authentication, right? In general, you want to have a call that really sort of the fastest or returns the least data, because it really just checks that the connection is working. All right, so, but let's set this up. And sorry, I'm always opening the wrong tab. And I'm going to say this is a get. All right. And for the query, we don't care about the units. All we want to do, we can just take this San Francisco, for example. This is so the connection check will always check San Francisco. I need to move this up here. And then, all right. And so what we can do is we can just take out the units. I mean, it's not going to change much, but all right. And then finally, we're going to define the outputs, which is right, status code, and then headers, body, and then this is going to be an object, and then this is also an object. And one thing we also need to provide the connection information. So we're going to take it from here and do it like this, right? So we already can test this, right? We don't have the messaging part done, but that's fine. Let's click run. And what's cool, we already have the connection, so we can just use it, and then click run. Right, and this looks like we didn't get an error, so this is good. All right, let's finish building this. I'm also going to create, so if everything is working, we're going to create a message and say connection is successful. And now for the outputs, I'm going to have two things, the status code, right, and the message. Okay. So for the status code, I'm going to take the status code from here and connect it for the success, and then the message. And again, usually you will want to rename these, but just to save time, I'm not going to. Okay. So this is if everything is successful. Now, if it's not successful, I'm going to open an if error. And then there's this object that I get. Now I'm going to add one key to it, which is status code, right? And then I'm going to map the message like this. This is for the error sort of case and the status code. All right. Now let's do two more steps here. I'm going to compare, and I'm going to take the status code. And if it's 200, right, if the HTTP code is 200, then it's true. And I can rename this to working, which means my connection is working. Okay. And then the last step is I'm going to use a construct object, and I'm going to take the status code and the message. And finally, I'm going to take this true or false working, right, and connect it to here because this is true false. And finally, this is the message. Okay. So let's run this again. And this is the working connection. And I'm going to create a connection that's not working in just a second. All right, so we get back a result and it says true, it's working, and then we get the message that connection is successful. Now let's test when it's not working. Now what I can do is I can create another connection, and we'll call this weather fake net builder, and then you can enter any key you want, but this really just means the connection is not working. And click create, and we're going to use this connection. Let's run this. Right, so we get an error, and then this is what we get back for one, and then the message. Okay, so when you've been using this this connector and you come to a flow and it checks the connection, and maybe the key, I don't know, something happened with the key and it's no longer valid, then you're going to see this. All right, the auth ping is not going to fail, but it's going to fail gracefully, right? You're going to see this error message, hey, something is not working there. Okay, so that's what we did here. All right, let's go, and we're almost there. Now the last part is we've got the two system flows to help us, make a connection, make a call, and check the connection health. And then so the last thing is that we're gonna create a flow for the actual action. Okay, so we're gonna create a new flow, and we're gonna call this weather. That's the actual action name, and then checks or returns weather for a city, right? And save. All right, and then the type is going to be an action right here. Okay, and you can see where again we have the connection information, And now we need to set up inputs. Okay. So for inputs, I'm going to click inputs, and I'm going to create a group. The first one is going to be city. And notice this card on the right-hand side, how it updates. It's really neat. I like that. So you can see how it looks. And then I'm going to add country code, right? Now, I also want to be able to specify the units. And for that, I mean, it could be an input, but it could also be in options. Okay, but let's see just how the options work. And I'm going to add units. And now I'm going to make this a drop down. And then the first one is metric. And then I don't want to type. Let's see here. Where is my, right here. And then I'm going to use this. And then this is called Imperial. Again, now I switched the wrong window again. And then finally, this is Kelvin. This is actually the default value is called standard, right? And you can say no default option, but you can also select the default option if you would like. But you can, of course, change it as well, right? But all right. So we now, let's make a call to HTTP helper, right? That's the flow that makes the call. And then I'm going to choose a flow, HTTP helper. Okay. And now we need to set up this information. Okay. Now the URL in this case, because it's an action, so the URL is sort of built in, right? That's the whole point of an action. Now, you also probably used a custom API action, right? So you could actually build an action where you specify the relative URL. Okay, that's a custom API action on the connector, but we're not going to do it. Just we don't have enough time. So that's why the URL is going to be sort of hard-coded. I'm going to my cheat sheet. This is the relative URL. All right. The request method is get. Okay. And now we need to set up the query. So the query has to include this information. So let's do that. I'm going to use text concatenate card. And I'm going to take the city, and then put a comma, and add a country code, right? And again, why is this format? Well, if I scroll up, and you saw this before, if I go back to the Open Weather API, let's see here. If I can find an example. Let me see here. Sorry. I want to find an example. Get current weather. So you can specify the latitude, the longitude, but other features. I just saw it somewhere. Well, now I can find it, but that's all right. This is coming from it is coming from the API. So I thought it was somewhere available somewhere here, but anyhow, that's fine. Anyhow, so this is how it looks: city, comma, and then country code. And there's some other examples. So that's for the city and country. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, I keep going back. Well, actually, you know what? Here, I'm going to go to my tutorial. I have it in my tutorial. That's actually better. I'll show you. Let's see here. know there's a lot of scrolling, but let me see if I can find it. Here we go. All right, this is what I was looking for, right? Right, this Q as the query, and then there's the city name, and optionally you can also enter a country code, and then units. Okay, so this is the code that I was looking for. All right, so let's now add the Q, and then I'm going to use a construct card, and I'm going to say Q, and I'm going to map this whole the city country code, and then for the units, I'm going to say units, and I'm going to take from options and map it like this. All right, and then this is my whole query, right? I'm going to take the query and map it like this. All right. I don't have any header information or any body information for this particular action, but I do need to set the connection. I'm going to map the connection. Lastly, I'm going to say define the outputs here, so status code and headers and body, and then these two need to be an object. Right? And then for the action, I'm going to define the outputs, right? And status code, and then this is going to be headers. Now this will be an object, right? I'm not going to define any keys, so I'm just going to delete this key, right? And I'm going to add one more for the body. And same thing, this is going to be an object, but I'm not going to define any sub keys. So, right, this is how the card looks. And I'm going to pass the information. All right. Well, very cool. Let me see if there are any questions. Well, I don't see any questions. Okay. We are almost there. And well, actually, you know what? I didn't test this. All right. I didn't test this because I see the flow is off. So let's test this. Make sure it works. I'm going to using a valid connection. For the units, I'm going to enter metric. For the city, let's go Rome, right? Italy, and then click run. All right. And then it works. And then if you look at the body information, we can see the temperature and all the other information. All right. All right. Well, we're almost ready for deployment. Now, before deploying, let's change the settings here a little bit. And I'm going to click edit. And I'm going to change the icon to, I don't know. Let's go with this one. I'm going to change the icon. And I am also going to change the color to maybe, I don't know, something yellowish. This is green. Well, that's fine. We'll just use this yellow. As for the documentation, so I can do something just like, let me click on API here. So I can just copy this URL. And for the email, I'll just enter my email. All right. And I'm going to click save. All right. So this is my connector is ready. I'm going to go to deployment. Okay. And then I'm going to create a test version. Right. And then create a test version. And then you can create different text, right? You can make updates, but I can create another one, for example. And then I'm going to say deploy this version. Right. So it's going to take a few seconds here to deploy. And then we can use this in a workflow. Also here, so this is a private deployment, which means it's only available from our organization. The next step could be is you submit it, and then you where you would want to make your connector public to everyone. So that's also an option, right? So I've deployed the connector. I'm going to go, let me just refresh. Refresh. Okay. And I'm going to add action, and I'm going to search for weather, and notice that this is that I just built, right? The icon without the lines. I'm going to use weather, select the connector, and this is the action that I have, only one action. I'm going to select it. And then it looks like any other connectors you used before, right? I need to create a connection, right? There's no connection to this connector. I'm going to new connection, right? And then we can just say this is workflows. The other one was connector builder. And then the API key, I'm just going to use a different API key. I'm going to use this API key and set the API key. And then notice here, I'm going to click create. It's going to check the connection. So this is where the Auth Ping is, right? And then I've got a card. And if I want to say options, I could change the options for units if I wanted to. But for the city, let's enter again. And you can test the card, right? And then we get back this response. But once you tested the card, we can also test the entire flow, right? And this is the response that we get. Okay. So what we did is, we built a connector, and then we deployed the connector, and now we are using the connector in a flow. One thing I also want to say is that as I was building it, the output here is just the raw HTTP response, right? The status code, headers, and body. And again, if I go to execution history, you can see how this looks. So this kind of response is usually more appropriate for a custom API action, right? Where you specify the endpoint. But for actions, you likely want to define the response. What I mean by that is, let me show you. Let's get an Okta card connector. Let's go with read user. Oh, so this is right where it's checking the connection. And then I'm going to click just save. So notice the response here is just raw HTTP, but the response here, they're actually sort of a defined response, okay? So likely you want to do the same thing for your action, okay? And the way you would do it, I just didn't do it because it just takes a lot of time, but you would go to flows and you would go to your action, and right here, right, instead of defining these kind of a raw outputs, you would define what you need. And then inside, right, you would extract the information from body and then connect it to the outputs that you need, okay? I'm planning to write a tutorial or a knowledge-based article how to do that, right? But that's just one thing so you need to be aware of. All right, well, that's again what I wanted to show you. But just to, again, quick overview, we created a connector. It has an overview tab with authentication setup. It has 3 flows, right? The first 2 we built, HTTP helper and Auth Ping. These are system flows. They're not visible to the end user. And then we built the weather action. We created 2 connections, right? One real one and one fake one for testing. And then there's also deployment. Then you can deploy the connector. And then lastly, we use the connector in a flow. All right. Oh, it failed because it wants this information. Cool. Well, let me see if there are any questions. So let's see here. So there's let's see. I came late. I wanted to know if this was covered. I can see the connector builders in Okta preview. Can we get access to this right now on live production? So yes, I'm using Okta preview, But yes, the connector builder is also available in Okta production. So yes, absolutely. All right, and let me see here. I'm going to, let me go here. Okay, I'm using Jump API connector in one flow for post command. Do you know any issues with using both of their APIs in a flow? Do you think building a unique connector like you just demonstrated would be a better solution? I guess I'm not sure. I'm using both Jump API connector in one flow for post command. I guess I'm not maybe sure I fully understand the question. What it means by both. If you want to maybe add more information, or email me later, that's also cool. Oh, they have a classic API and an updated API. Yeah, Slack is also cool. In general, if I mean, it's fine to use, I guess, an older API or a newer API. I mean, that's totally cool, right? Whether it's something they built, or if you're something you're building. So one thing also is, as far as I understand, is that if you're building a connector, now if it's private, it's different. But if you're building a public connector, I think there's one requirement where you need to own the API. So like I couldn't build, for example, an API for Okta, for example, not being part of Okta. So again, I don't know if that applies, but just something kind of to be aware of. But yeah, feel free to. I'll put my email here also. Yeah, feel free to hit me on Slack, or send me an email. So cool. Well, let me know if you have any other questions. And again, do try those tutorials. I mean, they're very step by step, and they'll take you through building a connector, kind of what I just did today. Well, I don't see any more questions, so thank you so much for attending today. The recording will be available on Crowdcast right as I end the session. YouTube tomorrow. I will also send you a message via Crowdcast with links to the YouTube recording, the tutorials, and maybe some other resources. But other than that, again, thank you for attending the session. If there's a session or a topic that you think would be good to cover in the future, let me know. My email is there, and again, any questions after the session as well, my email is there. Cool. Well, thank you, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.